indicator of what the consumer
All
in
right,
the country.
now we're going to talk about, turn my phone off, my TV off first. Now we're going to talk about Part S again, 1910.333, and this is selection and use of work practices. This is a pretty meaty standard. It's a little longer than the others in this part 31 through 35. So let's have at it. All right, A, general safety-related work practices shall be employed to prevent electric shock or other injuries resulting from either direct or indirect electrical contacts when work is performed near or on equipment or circuits which are or may be energized. The specific safety-related work practices shall be consistent with the nature and extent of the associated electrical hazards. Okay, good advice. De-energized parts. Live parts to which an employee may be exposed shall be de-energized before the employee works on or near them, unless the employer can demonstrate that de-energizing introduces additional or increased hazards or is infeasible due to equipment design or operational limitations. Live parts that operate less than 50 volts to ground need not be de-energized if there will be no increased exposure to electrical burns or to explosion due to electric arcs. Okay, every time OSHA says unless the employer can demonstrate, that puts a huge burden on the employer. You have to be so sure of that, because if somebody does get hurt, then you haven't done that. Then you haven't fulfilled that function, because put you out there if somebody gets hurt on it. If you've decided that I won't have to do this, so if you're going to do that, well, you better make darn sure you got yourself covered. And that's why they do that, I'm sure. Example 1, examples of increased or additional hazard include interruption of life support equipment, deactivation of emergency alarm systems, shutdown of hazardous location ventilation equipment, or removal of illumination for an area. So that might be reasons why they keep something energized. Note 2, examples of work that may be performed on or near energized circuit parts because of infeasibility due to equipment design or operational limitations include testing of electrical circuits that can only be performed with the circuit energized, and work on circuits that form an integral part of a continuous industrial process in a chemical plant that would otherwise need to be completely shut down in order to permit work on one circuit or piece of equipment. And note 3, work on or near de-energized parts is covered by paragraph B of this section. Okay. Energized parts. If the exposed live parts are not de-energized for the reasons of increased or additional hazards or infeasibility, which we just talked about, other safety-related work practices shall be used to protect employees who may be exposed to the electrical hazards involved. Such work practices shall protect employees against contact with energized circuit parts directly with any part of their body or indirectly through some other conductive object. The work practices that are used shall be suitable for the conditions under which the work is to be performed and for the voltage level of the exposed electric conductors or circuit parts. Specific work practice requirements are detailed in paragraph C of this section. So this is paragraph B now, working on or near exposed de-energized parts. Application. This paragraph applies to work on exposed de-energized parts or near enough to them to expose the employee to any electrical hazard they present. Conductors and parts of electric equipment that have been de-energized but have not been locked out or tagged in accordance with paragraph B of this section shall be treated as energized parts, and paragraph C of this section applies to work on or near them. B2, locking and tagging. While any employee is exposed to contact with parts of fixed electric equipment or circuits which have been de-energized, the circuits energizing the parts shall be locked out or tagged, or both, in accordance with the requirements of this paragraph. The requirements shall be followed in the order in which they are presented. In other words, paragraph B2I first, then B2II, etc. At note, as used in this section, fixed equipment refers to equipment fastened in place or connected by permanent wiring methods. So notice they say tagged, not tagged out. It says they're using a little different nomenclature than 1910.147. Well, we're actually attempting the same result. Note 2, lockout and tagging procedures that comply with paragraphs C through F of 1910.147 will also be deemed to comply with paragraph B2 of this section, provided that the procedures address the electrical safety hazards covered by this subpart, and the procedures also incorporate the requirements of paragraphs B2 3D and B2 4B of this section. So B2 3D and 4B. Don't forget those two. 3D and 4B. All right. I'll get that. 1933 B2I, procedures. The employer shall maintain a written copy of the procedures outlined in paragraph B2 and shall make it available for inspection by employees and by the Assistant Secretary of Labor and his or her authorized representatives. Note, the written procedures may be in the form of a copy of paragraph B of this section. That's unusual, but okay, that's what they're saying. Now, when they say make it available by the Assistant Secretary of Labor and his or her authorized representative, they're talking about OSHA. That's their paragraph that lets OSHA examine them or makes you give it to them. De-energizing equipment. Safe procedures for de-energizing circuits and equipment shall be determined before circuits or equipment are de-energized. Okay. In other words, you don't wait till you're doing it. You have to determine this beforehand. B2B. So the circuits and equipment to be worked on shall be disconnected from all electric energy sources. Control circuit devices such as push buttons, selector switches, and interlocks may not be used as the sole means for de-energizing circuits or equipment. Interlocks for electrical equipment may not be used as a substitute for lockout and tagging procedures. So if you have a piece of equipment and you open up the doors to it and shuts it off, that's not locking it out. Okay, that is not doing, you're gonna hack it in 1947 or in this section. Why? Because somebody could close them and it's energized again. It's pretty simple. So that's not to be used. Okay, B2, this is one of the paragraphs they were talking about, I think. Stored electric energy which might endanger personnel shall be released. Capacitors shall be discharged and high capacitance elements shall be short-circuited and grounded if the stored electric energy might endanger personnel. Note, if the capacitors or associated equipment are handled in meeting this requirement, they shall be treated as energized. That's from the paragraph they said has to be, in addition, if you use 1947, that's got to be in there too. Stored non-electrical energy in devices that could re-energize electric circuit parts shall be blocked or relieved to the extent that the circuit parts could not be accidentally energized by the device. I think that's the other one that they wanted in there if you use 1947. B2III, application of locks and tags. 33, okay, a lock and a tag shall be placed on each disconnecting means used to de-energize circuits and equipment on which work is to be performed, except, here we go, as provided in paragraphs B23C and B23E of this section. The lock shall be attached so as to prevent persons from operating the disconnecting means unless they resort to undue force or the use of tools. And that's pretty much, that verbiage is the same. But notice this is a lock and a tag. So this is not lockout or tag out like 1947. They're saying a lock and a tag. Each tag, here you go, shall contain a statement prohibiting unauthorized operation of the disconnecting means and removal of the tag. So this tag has to have instructions on it as to kind of why the lock's there and what you can't do. If a lock cannot be applied, or if the employer can demonstrate the tagging procedures will provide a level of safety equivalent to that obtained by the use of a lock, a tag may be used without a lock. Again, the same thing with 1910.147 when they say tag out. In there, they specifically say tag out is only a warning. And here they're saying if a lock cannot be applied, or not this is, they should not have said or if the employer could demonstrate the tagging procedures will provide a level of safety equivalent to that of a lock, a tag may be used without a lock. I don't know how tagging procedures can be get you a level of safety with better than lockout, but that's what they're saying here. A tag used without a lock, as permitted by paragraph B23C of this section, shall be supplemented, now here you go, by at least one additional safety measure that provides a level of safety equivalent to that obtained by use of a lock. Examples of additional safety measures include the removal of an isolating circuit element, blocking of a controlling switch, or opening an extra disconnecting device. So if you're going to use a tag without a lock, you also have to do at least one additional safety measure that provides a level of safety equivalent to that obtained by use of a lock. So they don't say that you have to lock these out, though, but why wouldn't you? Blocking of a controlling switch, opening of an extra disconnecting device. All right, a lock may be placed without a tag only under the following conditions. Only one circuit or piece of equipment is de-energized. The lockout period does not extend beyond the work shift, and employees exposed to the hazards associated with re-energizing the circuit or equipment are familiar with this procedure. So here they're saying a lock without a tag. If the circuit, only one piece of equipment is de-energized, the lockout period doesn't go beyond the shift, and employees exposed to the hazards are familiar with the procedure. Okay, I'm a big favor of the lock. Tags to me are secondary, but locks are the main thing. Verification of de-energized condition. The requirements of this paragraph shall be met before any circuits or equipment can be considered and worked as de-energized. A qualified person shall operate the equipment operating controls or otherwise verify that the equipment cannot be restarted. Now that's kind of odd. Here they say a qualified person, where in reality, they don't say what they're qualified at, but they mean it's electrical, so they mean somebody qualified electrically. And but I don't know why you wouldn't let the operator of the equipment do that. I mean, but it's got to be, it can't be just the operator of the equipment. It's got to be a qualified person. A qualified person shall use test equipment to test the circuit elements and electrical parts of equipment to which employees will be exposed, and shall verify that the circuit elements and equipment parts are de-energized. The test shall also determine if any energized condition exists as a result of inadvertently induced voltage or unrelated voltage feedback, even though specific parts of the circuit have been de-energized and presumed to be safe. If the circuit to be tested is over 600 volts nominal, the test equipment shall be checked for proper operation immediately after this test. So they're worried that maybe the test equipment didn't work or got fried or something like that, and you really now you don't really know what the voltage is. So that's over 600 volts. Re-energizing equipment. These requirements shall be met in the order given before circuits or equipment are re-energized, even temporarily. A qualified person shall conduct tests and visual inspections as necessary to verify that all tools, electrical jumpers, shorts, grounds, and other such devices have been removed so that the circuits and equipment can be safely energized. Employees exposed to the hazards associated with re-energizing the circuit or equipment shall be warned to stay clear of circuits and equipment. Each lock and tag shall be removed by the employee who applied it under his or her direct supervision. However, if this employee is absent from the workplace, then the lock or tag may be removed by a qualified person designated to perform this task. Okay, each lock or tag shall be removed by the employee who applied it under his or her direct supervision. That is confusing because it indicates there's more than one employee there. I don't know why they just didn't put a period after the employee who applied it, or under his or her direct supervision. So they're saying, see, I don't like that. They're saying that if I applied my lock on it, and you can take it off if I let you, if you're under my supervision. Don't agree with that, but that's the way it's written. Okay, there you go then. However, lock or tag may be removed by a qualified person designated to perform this task, provided that the employer ensures that the employee who applied the lock or tag is not available at the workplace. That's consistent with 147. How do you do that? Well, there's a couple ways you could do it. First thing you do is look around and ask, hey, where's Clyde or where's Harry? And find out what happened to Clyde or Harry. And then you can go check their time cards if you have time cards, or talk to HR. Hey, this person clock out if it's electronic, and go look at the parking lot, see if their car's there. Call them on their cell phone. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can do that. So then the employer ensures that they're not there. The employer ensures that the employee is aware that the locker tag has been removed before he or she resumes work at that workplace. So those two are consistent with OSHA. I mean, although it's all OSHA, but in 1910.147. There shall be a visual determination that all employees are clear of the circuits and equipment. Working on or near exposed energized parts application. This paragraph applies to work performed on exposed live parts. Now we're in C, now we're talking about live parts, involving either direct contact or by means of tools or materials, or near enough to them for employees to be exposed to any hazard they present. Work on energized equipment. Only qualified persons may work on electric circuit parts or equipment that have not been de-energized under the procedures of paragraph B of this section. Such persons shall be capable of working safely on energized circuits and shall be familiar with the proper use of special precautionary techniques, personal protective equipment, insulating and shielding materials, and insulated tools. So the person has to have some knowledge before they can do this. Overhead lines. If work is to be performed near overhead lines, the line shall be de-energized and grounded, or other protective means shall be provided before work is started. If the lines are to be de-energized, arrangements shall be made with the person or organization that operates or controls the electric circuits involved to de-energize and ground them. If protective measures such as guarding, isolating, or insulating are provided, these precautions shall prevent employees from contacting such lines directly with any part of their body or indirectly through conductive materials, tools, or equipment. Note, the work practices used by qualified persons installing insulating devices on overhead power, transmission, or distribution lines are covered by 1910.269 and not by this part. Under paragraph C2, unqualified persons are prohibited from performing this type of work. Overhead lines. Overhead lines means what? A whole bunch of voltage and very dangerous. Unqualified persons. When an unqualified person is working in an elevated position near overhead lines, the location shall be such that the person and the longest conductive object he or she make contact cannot come closer to any unguarded, energized overhead line than the following distances. Now they're saying here that if you're putting up something a 6 foot part or something like that, you're installing, so you can't, that you'll be handling, that can't come any closer than these distances either. For voltages to ground below 50,000 volts, 10 feet. For voltages to ground over 50,000 volts, 10 feet plus 4 inches for every 10,000 volts over 50,000 volts. So if it's 80,000, that'll be another foot. 3 times 4 is 12. So when an unqualified person is working on the ground in the vicinity of overhead lines, the person may not bring any conductive object closer to unguarded energized overhead lines than a distance and given in paragraph C3IA, which is the previous one. So that's an unqualified person working on the ground anywhere near over in the vicinity of overhead lines. I noticed just lately in the last couple of years, they used to put a what do they call it, a full classical sign up about overhead lines every so often. You'd see them on construction sites. Now they put them at every place there is overhead lines. That's how important this is. Because you know what? You forget about overhead lines. You're working on the ground, you're working on stuff. You don't think about overhead lines. And all of a sudden you pick something up, bam. Not good. Qualified persons. When a qualified person is working in the vicinity of overhead lines, whether in an elevated position or on the ground, the person may not approach or take any conductive object without an approved insulating handle closer to exposed energized parts than shown in table S5, unless the person is insulated from the energized part. Gloves with sleeves, if necessary, rated for the voltage involved, are considered to be insulation of the person from the energized part on which the work is performed, or the energized part is insulated both from all other conductive objects at a different potential and from the person, or the person is insulated from all conductive objects at a potential different from that of the energized part. Approach distances for qualified employees, alternating current. So your voltage range here. So 300 volts or less, basically just saying minimum approach distance, avoid contact. Over 300 to 750, stay 1 foot away. 750 to 2000, 1 foot 6 inches. Over 2000, but not over 15,000, 2 feet. 15 to 37, 3 feet. 37 to 87, 3.5 feet. 87 to 120, 87 and a half, not over 121, 4 feet. 121 kilovolt, not over 140 kilovolt, 4 foot 6 inches. That's the minimum approach distance. Vehicular and mechanical equipment. Any vehicle or mechanical equipment capable of having parts of its structure elevated near energized overhead lines shall be operated so that a clearance of 10 feet is maintained. If the voltage is higher than 50,000 volts, the clearance shall be increased 4 inches for every 10,000 volts over that. However, under any of the following conditions, the clearance may be reduced. If the vehicle is in transit with the structure lowered, the clearance may be reduced to 4 feet. If the voltage is higher than 50,000 volts, the clearance shall be increased 4 inches for every 10,000 volts over that voltage. And the vehicle is in transit with the structure lowered. If insulating barriers are installed to prevent contact with the lines, and if the barriers are rated for the voltage of the line being guarded and are not a part of or an attachment to the vehicle or its raised structure, the clearance may be reduced to a distance within the designated working dimensions of the insulating barrier. If the equipment is an aerial lift insulated for the voltage involved, and if the work is performed by a qualified person, the clearance between the uninsulated portion of the aerial lift and the power line may be reduced to the distance given in Table S5. Employees standing on the ground may not contact the vehicle or mechanical equipment or any of its attachment unless, here we go again with the unlesses, the employee is using protective equipment rated for the voltage, or the equipment is located so that no uninsulated part of its structure, that portion of the structure that provides a conductive path to employees on the ground, can come closer to the line than permitted in paragraph C3 III of this section. If any vehicle or mechanical equipment capable of having parts of its structure elevated near energized overhead lines is intentionally grounded, employees working on the ground near the point of grounding may not stand at the grounding location whenever there is a possibility of overhead line contact. Additional precautions, such as the use of barricades or insulation, shall be taken to protect employees from hazardous ground potentials, depending on earth resistivity and fault currents, which can develop within the first few feet or more outward from the grounding point. So if you have a lot of voltage, like overhead lines, 50,000 volts, going to ground, the earth around that ground can be extremely hazardous. And what they tell you is, if you happen to be, let's say, in a vehicle and your vehicle hits it and your cab is insulated, you want to get out, you hop on 1 foot, because then you don't have to complete the circuit. You put 2 feet down and you've completed that circuit between your feet. So you hop on 1 foot, and some people will tell you hop on 2 foot, keep your feet touching each other, close together. But don't think that is gospel. Illumination. Employees may not enter spaces containing exposed energized parts unless illumination is provided that enables the employees to perform the work safely. Makes a lot of sense, that. Where lack of illumination or an obstruction precludes observation of the work to be performed, employees may not perform tasks near exposed energized parts. Employees may not reach blindly into areas which may contain energized parts. I'm going to read that again. Employees may not reach blindly into areas which may contain energized parts. It's a shame we have to tell people that. Confined or enclosed workspaces. When an employee works in a confined or enclosed space, such as a manhole or vault that contains exposed energized parts, the employer shall provide and the employee shall use protective shields, protective barriers, or insulating materials as necessary to avoid inadvertent contact with these parts. Doors, hinged panels, and the like shall be secured to prevent their swinging into an employee and causing the employee to contact exposed energized parts. Conductive materials and equipment. Conductive materials and equipment that are in contact with any part of an employee's body shall be handled in a manner that will prevent them from contacting exposed energized conductors or circuit parts. If an employee must handle long-dimensional conductive objects, such as ducts and pipes, in areas with exposed live parts, the employer shall institute work practices, such as the use of insulation, guarding, and material handling techniques, which will minimize the hazard. Portable ladders. Portable ladders shall have non-conductive side rails if they are used where the employee or the ladder could contact exposed energized parts. So it's a good policy. When I first got to OK Foods, there was a lot of metal ladders. And when I left there, I don't think there was any. So because it's just a good idea to not have ladders like that where maintenance people might be on it. And they may be exposed to energized parts inadvertently. So conductive apparel, conductive articles of jewelry and clothing, such as watch bands, bracelets, rings, keychains, necklaces, metallized aprons, cloth with conductive thread, or metal headgear, may not be worn if they might contact exposed energized parts. However, such articles may be worn if they are rendered non-conductive by covering, wrapping, or other insulating means. Housekeeping duties. Where live parts present an electrical contact hazard, employees may not perform housekeeping duties at such close distances to the parts that there is a possibility of contact, unless adequate safeguards, such as insulating equipment or barriers, are provided. Electrically conductive cleaning materials, including conductive solids such as steel wool, metallized cloth, and silicon carbide, as well as conductive liquid solutions, may not be used in proximity to energized parts unless procedures are followed, which will prevent electrical contact. Interlocks. Only a qualified person in following requirements of paragraph C of this section may defeat an electrical safety interlock, and then only temporarily while he or she is working on the equipment. The interlock system shall be returned to its operable condition when this work is completed. So I could get, sometimes you might have to defeat an interlock so you can maybe open the door and look at how it's happening or work on something. So there's your little bypass on the interlocks. But it's only a qualified person, and only when they're working on equipment, and they got to return it to operable condition when this work's completed. So that's the end of 1910.133. A lot of stuff in there, especially the lockout, very similar. If you know 147, you'll be okay with this one, except there's a couple of paragraphs about capacitors. And of course, under 147, that would hold true too, because if their capacitors energized, it's a hazard. So that's it for that section. A couple more to go. In the meantime, be safe.